Welcome to Quantum RX, the podcast that teaches you how to move beyond stuck emotions and trauma for mind, body, and spirit healing. I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie Davis. All right, everyone. I am super excited today because I have on the amazing Jonathan Carroll, and he's a little bit different than a lot of the guests I've had on from the standpoint of we connected online, but when I met him in the Facebook group from Natalie Bullen, who is amazing in her own right as well, I was instantly drawn to him because of his rawness and his vulnerability and his authenticity and the work that he's doing in the world. And so I was like, this is a person I want to, get to know more. And, I've watched him online, and I think you're going to be in for a treat today because he's going to be sharing something that I think is very rare in the world. So I just wanted to say, welcome, Jonathan. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited about this conversation.
Me too. Because like I said, he, what drew me to him was the fact that, last year and the past couple of years, I've been in some healing circles and been in some retreats and also been in some coaching programs where they were very soulful and heart-led, but also there was a strong male component there. And I had never really experienced that. And I think that it brings a really important piece to healing, when you get into like the divine masculine and the divine feminine and all of this and the balance. And, I'm sure you would agree that we live in a world that's very masculine driven and driver driven, and balancing the two is really, really important. So that was, one of the reasons that I was like, this guy's really, really cool. And I love what he's doing. So I wanted to just start off with, because this is going to be me learning too. What did your journey look like? Earlier before we got on, we talked a little bit about going from that place of, kind of pain to a place of knowing and understanding, and being. So I would love to hear about, your journey and how you got to the place you are now.
Yeah. Beautiful. I would maybe even preface for any of the listeners that all of the journey is about steps and layers. And so that as you hear anyone speak about their journey, we often can find ourselves reflected somewhere in that journey. And then you might potentially lose track at some point because you haven't reached that part of the journey yet. And that's super cool too, because it's got an invitational energy to it as well, which is like, oh, I don't know that part of the path yet. So I'm intrigued to hear more about it. And when I hear people that are speaking about aspects of consciousness, ascension, etc., healing that are beyond where I've reached, I lean in because I think, wow, that sounds like something I don't quite understand yet. For me, it was, I'm just going to ballpark it, about 8 or 9 years ago for my 40th birthday. And I had just experienced another romantic breakup. But that one in particular, it really hit hard. Maybe a lot to do with what I believed that partner represented, and that I was sort of like kicking back to the ocean, so to speak. And there was an awareness of a pattern that I had been creating in my life that was repeating on itself, and I couldn't quite figure out why the pattern kept repeating. In this particular case, like releasing wonderful women back into the ocean that, could make great partners. I have such a different view on all of that now, but at the time it felt like, can I swear?
Sure.
I felt like I was fucked up. Like I had really something wrong with me. And it really ate at my core that I couldn't quite figure out why I kept repeating a similar pattern and why I happened to be creating suffering for others and myself at the same time. And so after this particular breakup, I decided I was going to do something different than before, which the before was like go on a 3-year alcohol bender and just rip through all kinds of numbing and sex to sort of make myself feel wanted and all kinds of ways that the unhealed version of me was acting out and crying out for help, maybe even. And so I decided to do something different. I hired a life coach and on the heels of reading some Instagram post by a woman that was talking about her recovery from addiction. The question posed to her was, is there anything that you ever deemed as too woo-woo? And she said, let me tell you about woo-woo. When I was going through my healing process, I hired this person, this person, this person. And so I just went like, well, there's the recipe right there. So I did the same thing. I hired a life coach. I hired a breathwork practitioner. I hired a mindfulness coach. I went for Reiki sessions. I went to meet with a psychic. I went like into the deep end as far as the woo goes, thinking like, these are all the things I haven't tried yet. And I deeply thought I was that fucked up that I needed to find the silver bullet that was going to fix me. Well, sure enough, my seed had already been cracked open, but now I was available to see and witness myself and some ideas about spirituality that I had never really gone into in that depth. And it was a very expansive time in my life because my coach was also spiritual and helped introduce me to books and ideas and things that were really waking me up. And then all of these other practitioners were kind of feeding into it. And, I thought that there was going to be a silver bullet, and it turns out that everything was complementary because at the end of the day, I was the common denominator learning about myself through these different modalities. And so I didn't get the girl back, but I got myself back. And that was not just a short-term, sort of process. It was several years. Like I'm still going, like it never ends, right? Once we start on this path.
Yeah.
And I'll skip over some bits, but we can come back to it if it makes sense. But I found myself in a lucky position at the beginning of the pandemic where, there was all this talk of going into lockdown. And I thought, she's like, lock me down next to the ocean and I'll be just fine. And so I left Canada and ended up renting a friend's villa on the ocean in Ecuador. And coming to Ecuador, I wasn't seeking it, but I found, or it found me, the medicine of ayahuasca. And then, so now I'm going into like plant medicine ceremonies and learning from that beautiful divine spirit, more about myself, more about raising consciousness, more about oneness, non-duality, all of these things that have become a part of my everyday belief systems now. And so I've just continued going deeper and deeper and deeper and being, I think it's important to mention, and it won't apply to everybody, but being removed from, people might understand the term, the matrix, like the grid of downtown Toronto and that life and that busyness and the bombardment of like energies and messaging and kind of capitalist, your dollars or how you make it in the world. When I was able to remove myself from that and spend lengths of time here on the coast in Ecuador with the ocean as my main programming, that really set up a lot of the healing that I've been able to go through. So without distractions and without the constant bombardment of programming and so on, I was able to go deeper into myself. And of course, there's been ups and downs, and we spoke about that when we hopped on before hitting record, that, none of this is linear. And so we're going to go through bouts of expansion and then into some deeper contractions. And then we'll go through light expansion and light contractions and then bigger ones again. And the whole thing is a giant zigzag, but the idea is that the upward trajectory is, towards the light on the way up, raising the vibes.
Absolutely. I love that you shared that, because that was something that it really hit on me in the last probably year and a half, that societally, you mentioned it, like the grid, being in Toronto, the matrix, all of that bombardment of energy. It doesn't really give you the space. It does not allow for the space for that healing and that expansion and contraction to occur. And for me, I grew up in Florida near the ocean, but now I've always been drawn to the mountains. I live in Colorado. We've been here since 2010, and that's kind of my place for healing too, where I can just clear out the cobwebs and just feel, the energy. But what's really interesting is I think we've all been taught that, healing and self-growth and all of this work is like, it's compartmentalized, and, you do it in like chunks, and it's linear and it's not. And I actually did a podcast on that probably about 2 months ago about the healing process and the fact that it is not linear. It's up and down, it's sideways, it spirals. There's so many things, and it is expansion and contraction and working with that. And that's like similarly to probably what you do with the people you work with. It's like I talk to people, on the healing side of my practice. And we talk about this. I'm like, we might need to see each other a lot. And then we might have, bouts where we go away from each other and then we come back, and that's the way I am with the people that I work on my journey, because I know that my journey is not over. I feel like the more I learn, the more you learn about this, the less you know almost. And it's, just being willing to step into that, being willing to step into that unknown and being uncomfortable with the fact that we are these little specks, these little specks and components of this vast universe of energy and intelligence. And earlier, you and I had mentioned, starting from that place of pain and then moving. And the way that I describe it to people is you're kind of pain and symptom focused, and it's very much in the physical body. And then eventually things start to clear out. You become more aligned, more connected to the oneness, the God, and all of the synchronicities that might be happening in the universe. And then you get to a place of kind of like that knowing, and it's more spiritual and much more expansive. Where would you say you are right now in that kind of process?
Ready to divide the audience?
Right. Yeah, that's okay.
I am God.
Yeah.
I am the universe. I am the energy that creates myself and everyone else who I see reflected through my eyes. I have come to the place where, through some of these medicine experiences, I have a distinct memory of it was during a Bufo ceremony. Bufo's the Sonoran desert toad. The compound is 5-MeO-DMT. So really powerful psychedelic medicine that I describe as the rocket ship to meet God, and very powerful. So on this rocket ship to meet God, it's more like meeting yourself, realizing, shoot, I am the oneness, I am the everything, and I exist at the intersection of every non-duality, which is massive realization. But I remember this memory of like being up, like kind of, if I imagine a direction, it was like up and away, and having this view looking down at myself laying on a bamboo mat here in Ecuador on a farm or a grassy, sort of area. And the consciousness of me, the bigger, unified me, looked down and was like, oh yeah, you're Jonathan in this lifetime. He's a good guy. You'll have fun with that. It's like,
That's
so
awesome.
aware of like, I am this little mushroom that popped up from the mycelium, and, but I am every part of it as well. And so when you ask me, where am I on that journey? I'm at huge levels of peace and aware of the now moment, and that this is the most magical opportunity to feel alive, is to sink into the now. And to see everybody as my brothers and sisters, just trying to make sense of it all on the path.
Yeah, I absolutely get where you're coming from when you say all of that. And there people who have walked this journey, I think they understand you get to a place where there's a peace, there's a knowingness, right? It's one of those things where you don't experience much fear in this space anymore, because I mean, I feel like inside myself, I know that even if things get really, really hard, and they do because it's life, right? Things get hard, I know everything's going to be okay. It's like, it's that difference between living with a fear and then living with the knowingness and the peace. And there's so much liberation to that, to not have to think about those things on a daily basis, the things that so many people are going through. I mean, for me, one of the pieces of the puzzle that, I mean, obviously I wanted to transform myself, but the people that I work with, it's like, especially since the pandemic, but the last 10 years or so, the level of just anxiety and discontent and fear and just frustration in the world has risen dramatically. And I was like, I really want to be a part of the puzzle that helps get us going in the right direction. And so I knew that the change had to come from within myself. And then, part of me, we've talked about human design, and I'm a manifestor generator 5-1. So I am one of those people who I get ideas, I synthesize them, and I put them out to the world. And so as I look back on my life, I can see where all the pieces of the puzzle have fallen together, but that it hasn't been easy because, and this is something I want to ask you about. I remember being a kid and just feeling different. I always related to adults more than I related to kids. I always felt like an outcast. Like I could never, even though I was friends with lots of groups of people, I never felt like anyone really got me. And I would say probably more in the last 5 years, I have found those people because every time you're searching, you're looking for that connectedness, that kinship. And always thought I was getting to it. And then there was always something that I would say let me down in that process. And then, you get to it. You get to that place where you realize it comes from within us and we are the creators and we are the one. And it was just fascinating because I've had most of these realizations in the past several years, doing some of the work that you talked about. I definitely think that psychedelics they open up a level of consciousness in our brains that it's very incredibly difficult to access without the assistant. So I totally get where you're coming from, but most of my life it's been a struggle, but I see where all the seeds were planted and the reasons why everything happened. And, when everyone was going right, I went left, all of that type of stuff. So to go back to your childhood or youth or younger years, can you reflect back and see where this journey was meant to unfold?
Yeah, I look back at my inner child and I connect with my inner child very often because I believe that the inner child is one of our ultimate guides.
Mhm.
They are the seed of potential before the programming. And so when you can connect with that energy of limitless, infinite possibility and potential and tap into that, you can almost check in with the version of you before all of the shit got added on and just say like, what would you do? Or where would you like to go? Or how would you like to play this out? And
Yeah.
it's usually a lot more joyful and giving and
Mhm.
from overflow than it is when you add the programming back in.
Absolutely.
Um, I see a boy who was able to connect with everybody, who liked to be just a good boy, like just like someone you just give a pat on the head as they go by, like love that little guy. And so as I grew older in school years and into my teens and so on, I was one of those people that just connected with everybody. I had my core group, of course, but I never really felt like anyone. I was just friends with everybody. And then what maybe looking backwards, retrospectively, surprised me was at some point where things got hard for me and I was starting to experience the world in a way where, I was starting to drink a lot of alcohol and use that to either feel socially like I could fit in or be funny or be more something than I was. I'm kind of shy on first meetup. And so
Yeah.
that was breaking through the shyness and allowing me to be a bigger, sort of amplified version of self. And then much later on, realizing that that had left me, not just that, but that was also maybe a symptom of like where there were aspects of me that didn't feel whole yet. And so looking back on the journey, from childhood and beyond was this sort of like going from this happy go lucky kid to all of a sudden like feeling a little bit off, or maybe like they didn't fit in every instance, or they did fit in, but here's the reasons why. And, alcohol made that easy. And then arriving at this place where I jump into like a healing journey and realizing like there's so many layers to this game.
Yeah.
Um, and taking the time to move through them all is hard work. And it's, not to necessarily judge or look down on the matrix, the city and so on, but that is an easy environment to stay distracted in. And so to do your healing work and to go deep into the many layers of yourself and find what makes you operate the way you operate now. And is there anything that feels like it's resistance to a natural version of you, maybe the inner child version of you? Doing that without distraction is so much easier. And so sometimes that's geography. Sometimes it just means like turning off the tube and picking up a journal.
Yeah.
Maybe it means changing up your daily routine to fit in some meditation or some other self practices. And knowing that because it's not linear, you won't see the end right away. And the results may feel like they're not coming as fast as you want them to.
Yeah.
So giving yourself a huge dose of patience and grace.
Yes. These are a lot of the things I talk about too. And like I had mentioned earlier, the past year and a half had been very pivotal for me because I've been on this journey for about 13 years. And it was funny because, like I was talking before, it's like you kind of think you hit these milestones and you're like, oh, I've made it and I'm doing great. And then, the universe like knocks on the door and says, I'm going to knock you back down until you learn this lesson. And that was me last year. I told a lot of my close friends who are kind of in this space, like I feel like I experienced 2 ego deaths last year. And one of them was grief that I thought I had processed and I hadn't fully. And the other one was before that moment last year, it was in the middle of the year. I had never really felt insecure or unworthy. And I was actually in the middle of one of these ceremonies and everyone was like feeling great. There were people staring at the mountains and being like, I created them, the one I am and all of that. And I was outside of the group and I was just like, I felt like my whole being was like shaking and just being broken apart. And I'm like sitting there like, why is this happening to me? And everyone else is like amazing and happy and bliss. And I am not. And so my friend she's an extraordinary healer. She kind of pulled me to the side and she's like, come over here for 1 second. And I was like, okay. And she's like, just sit there. She's like, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when I ask what's wrong with you? And I said, I'm not good enough. And that was the first time I'd ever spoken those words and actually ever really felt that. So like you were talking about like those different layers and pieces of the onion, like I'd been doing hardcore work for 13 years. And it wasn't until that moment that was just like burst open and that it set off a cascade of events. I mean, I don't know if I've ever mentioned this to you, but I probably cried more last year in a 6-month period that I had in the previous decade. There was so much that needed to be released and shed and transformed. And me understanding where that came from and you talking about, just when you had your experience with Bufo, that piece of the consciousness saying, oh, this is you right now in this moment. I mean, I had realizations that what I was experiencing now had been a pattern that was repeated like 10 generations into the past. And that it was my job to heal it now. And so it was interesting because then it got also into like my lineage on both sides of my family, where there was healing that needed to come from there. I have some really interesting family history. Do you know who Aaron Burr is? From he might be from, like, you might recognize him from Hamilton, the musical Hamilton. But yeah, so he was, in American history, he was one of the kind of founding fathers and of the United States. And he is famous for assassinating Alexander Hamilton, who was another founding father in a duel. I'm a direct descendant of him. And we did some digging into our family history and I saw, it's funny, it's cool almost to be able to see history written in those contexts, because when you dig into it, you can see patterns that were present in his life. And this is on my dad's side that were repeated in my dad's family. And I'm just like, mind blowing stuff, right? And stuff on my mom's side too. So it was just all of that stuff. Like that was my last year was crazy, crazy ups, crazy downs, like sideways turns and all of that. So and then I got to that place and it was interesting because the last half of the year when I was like kind of in the middle of all this, that's when the knowing came in. That's when the knowing and the peace and you're going to be okay, even though this doesn't feel good type of stuff. And that's what I talk to people about when they're, entering this. They're confused. They're like, well, I don't feel good. Do I start off doing some kind of transformation work, trauma work, self growth, or do I start working on, the basics of my health? And I'm like, either one, it's your journey. Do what feels right for you. But I will help. I will support you in this process. I will guide you through this process. I will be here depending upon where you are on this journey. And so I love what you're doing because you're trying to bring some, what I think is really needed, some, I'd say, authenticity, honor, true heart centeredness to the realm of coaching and, just self growth and, all of that. I feel like in the last, because my practice has been virtual for 11 years. So I've been on the leading edge where I was one of the only practitioners that was virtual in the world 11 years ago to like being right flooded in a sea of people where there's a lot of noise and a lot of, just I would, like we talked about before, kind of a smoke and mirrors, a lot of people saying that they're doing things and then they can't really deliver on it. And what I see you doing is you're a vessel to bring together the people who are really doing it from the right place or the people who are trying to get to that place to be the best version of themselves. So then they can then, transmit everything out to the world. So I would love for you to talk about what you do.
Ah, all right. Let's see. What do I do? So I coach. That's one of the modalities you could say. That's one of
Yes.
the tools in my toolbox. But ever since getting certified as a coach, I later found plant medicine and have gone deep into the spiritual side of things. And so
Yep.
I really am clear about that's just a tool in the
Yes.
toolbox. And there's so
Hmm.
much more to holding space for somebody. Sometimes it's just deep listening. Other times there's some healing qualities to that. Other times it's a swift kick in the ass. It could be
Yeah.
any number of ways that we can help somebody to move into the place that feels like it's their next level, so to speak. I love this notion that I'm never really telling anybody who to be or what to do. It's really about getting clear, if everything is energy, what energy is yours? What's your authentic, innate, sort of
Yep.
blueprint? And then anything that's not that, we're going to work to release. Like we probably just don't need that anymore. That's maybe leftover programming or something. Somebody planted that idea inside of you. So we're really working hard to release all the things that are not you. Not unlike, Michelangelo chipping away at the marble to get to
Yeah.
who really was David, right?
Yeah.
So similar to that. I also have a couple different group programs with different focus. One for people who are really deep into spirituality and want to hang out with other woo-woo types and feel like they can take the masks off and be really weird.
Yep.
As well as people who are in that group, not unlike what you just said, that are leaning in and wanting to learn more and maybe can self-identify as saying like a lot of this is new to me, but I feel very drawn to it. And so I want to be in a container with others that are having these types of conversations. Plus we teach, we've got a couple faculty in there. And so they teach or provide different experiences. And then I do some hot seat coaching with folks and we have a lot of fun. Then another container is for people that would more identify as entrepreneurs doing quite well in their business and want to be held in a space and talk with other, heart-centered conscious leaders who are also doing the same. And so that's a really exciting space to be in. And then I have a retreat in summertime. This is going to be our third annual, just north of Toronto on a beautiful bespoke property next to the lake, surrounded by trees. And the whole idea of anything that I generally do in groups is really about helping people wake up to the innate gift that is them and that they have inside of them. We're all a piece of this gigantic puzzle, right? So if I am one, if I am the whole, well, you are too. Like I have to believe that if we are one, we are connected. And so
Yeah.
I need your piece of the puzzle, you need my piece of the puzzle, and we all need each other's to make the whole. And so when we come together in group, we're each providing a small amount and we're receiving a lot. And so the idea is that we step into this circle and we complete it
Okay.
every time. So the more the merrier, and that gives us the opportunity to kind of share and receive a lot at the same time. And that's the same with the retreat. As people come and they speak or present or offer a workshop, and everybody there gets to receive a ton just by being there.
Yeah. I love those kinds of experiences. I feel like when we're talking about like the growth and the transformation, when you're in those containers, it happens at such an accelerated rate because of that, because you are a piece of the puzzle and you're receiving so much. And I find when I come home, I need to make sure that I give myself space, not only from like, I usually, if I get home on like a Sunday, I'll block out the next couple days of my schedule because I know that I need to like just allow that integration process to start to take hold, and then just sit with it, right? And surrender and allow things to start to, alchemize and whatnot. So I love that. And I wanted to make sure that I brought this up because I love that you had mentioned that you were is it your coaching that you changed to Heart Talks? Is that what you renamed? Okay. I love that you call it Heart Talks because that's really what it is. Like when we are doing the work, we're speaking heart to heart with another person. And when you can meet somebody in that capacity, healing is much easier and transformative. So I love that you're doing that. And I also loved the way that you presented it. It was almost like you were surrendering in that moment. And I know I sent you a message. I sent you a voice message because I was like, that's just awesome because so many people, they don't share that. They don't share that part. And, you had some apologies. It looked like you were surrendering. And there was so much that was coming from that message. And I love that you took it and you decided to transform what you were doing and call it Heart Talks. And can you tell me a little bit about, I know, did it coincide with one of your, the Bufo experience?
Yeah, directly. It was
Okay.
the very last ceremony that I had, and I came sort of face to face with some ways that I had been blocking myself from my own kind of expansion or next steps. And they were rooted in fear. They were rooted in parts of me that were afraid of facing certain groups of people for fear that I wouldn't be accepted. And so there was this very subtle layer of judgment towards those groups, thinking that, I'll be the first one to sort of evaluate that as not for me, when in reality it was based in fear that I might not be for them. So wow, it was like a huge shift. We talked a little bit before about the arrogance piece, but I'll bring that up now because for me, it was realizing that I am quite confident in who I am and what I have to offer the world. The shadow side of that is when it's coupled with any kind of feeling of not being enough, we can amplify that and it can come off as arrogance. And so it was me realizing that there's times when I've maybe come off as arrogant, but it was a cover up for feeling like I may not be enough. And so I was pushing this aspect of myself, which was a mild, if not heavier distortion. But people who know me realize that maybe that's his sort of like online profile, or that's just when he's getting a little spicy or turning up the volume, but we know him to be that. So some people would say, I've never really experienced you that way. And others would definitely be like, oh, I'm glad you mentioned that. Like it was interesting to see the array of responses. There were some people like, I've never experienced you as that. And others like, there he is, that kind of admitting
and that was
it.
me. I don't, the way that I perceived and received, felt, I never got arrogance from anything that you said. So it was interesting. It's interesting that you
And it was
got that.
also appreciating that sometimes we can just come off in a particular way, and that it's also that awareness allows us to check it and go, is it coming from this place of confidence or coming from a place of not feeling enough, and that will change the energy of it, of the
Yeah,
output.
exactly.
There was also, my one-on-one coaching used to be called Amplified because it was based in this belief system that many of us are hiding from the world and afraid to be witnessed. And so much of the work I do is, especially in groups, is really about, no, that's not true. Groups and one-on-one is really about witnessing the divine in somebody else and realizing that they're a unique expression of God or nature or the universe, etc. And that so many people are wanting to be witnessed, but deathly afraid of being judged. And so this desire to be seen, but also to be appreciated and accepted and unconditionally loved in the witnessing process. And that's probably at the root of my work. But the Amplified had this sort of mild, nuanced distortion that was, you got to be big in the world. You got to shine bright.
Yeah.
And while I believe that's true, it can also send the message that there's this sort of pushed energy or this kind of like fake it till you make it kind of thing. And so I will always tell people to stretch their comfort zone and step into the light, to allow yourself to be witnessed. And that's really what I mean by amplified, is to just put yourself in a place where you can, if I said to you, Stephanie, I want you to be the most you can be. What would it look like for you to turn Stephanie up to 11? Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the amplification that I'm speaking about, but it could sort of have this nuance that you're faking something until because you don't feel like that's all you.
Yeah.
Anyways, Heart Talks was like really this realization during my Bufo ceremony, the last one, that was, wow, when you can really get real with yourself, radical truth, radical vulnerability, radical honesty, and radical acceptance, and meet all of that with unconditional love, you can transmute a bunch of things that may have been blind spots for you. And so now when I'm meeting people on these Heart Talks, it's like really dropping into a deep state of presence and quieting the outside noise, and then allowing the brain to almost completely shut off, because that's where most people's stress and problems come from, is an overactive brain or mind. And then we drop into the heart and we just check in with like, what's on the heart that we maybe haven't allowed to voice itself for some time, or if not ever. And the amazing stuff that's coming out of people for maybe the first time or the first time in a long time. And we do that with a place out of acceptance and non-judgment. And that can shift so much in such a short period of time. And so people are getting really beautiful results from that. I think there's also something very powerful about being held in that space without having to necessarily do anything about it. It's like just sometimes we just need to be witnessed and listened to, and including listen to ourselves, like listen to what is on my heart. And the shifts that are being created as a result are just super powerful. And it feels like, I haven't filled my calendar with coaching so easily ever, but putting out this invitation to join me for a Heart Talk, and it's like non-salesy. It's just an opportunity to drop in. And then if it feels like they want to do more of that, they can. It's amazing.
I love that. That's so beautiful, and it's so needed in the processes that I use. That's something that I've gotten to. I mean, I'm very trained in doing subconscious work, but a big piece of the puzzle for me has always been the talking and the holding space and witnessing something. And that wasn't something I was taught. That was something that I had in the process because it felt innately, it was like intuitive to me, like we need this. And it was funny because one of my mentors who has taught me quite a bit, he kind of ignored that. But it's funny because now that I've known him for 4 years now, he's come to that realization now. So it's really interesting about the honoring who you are, how you feel, being witness, speaking from the heart, and how important that is. Because the truth of it is like when I sit with people too, it's like sometimes they think they're going to get something, and then the outcome is very different because it's not what they needed at the moment. And I just, probably very similar to you, let that moment guide what I'm doing. But I so can relate to what you were saying earlier, because that was for me when I was talking about last year, how I got just kind of like broken to the core and like kind of I had to reemerge. A big piece of that was recognizing almost the same thing that you said, was the fact that I had been showing up in the world in a certain way and it was confident, but behind that was some, obviously I said I'm not good enough, right? That was what came out of it. And then I realized that, similar to what you were saying, was like there were certain groups that I had like a slightly veiled judgment of, because I had that fear of not being accepted or judged or seen by them too. And that was actually what caused me to change my program this year too. I realized like that all happened in November. I was experiencing a ton of resistance, like so much internal resistance. It almost felt like a vibration inside me. Like it was telling me like, you need to change and you need to change now. And you need to just let all of that go. Let the expectations of what other people have of you go. And you do you, and you be you, and you show up in the world authentically as yourself. And for me, that was, I was a researcher. I am, functional medicine doctor of 20 years. And it was so much of that, like having to be witnessed in that kind of like sciencey space where I was well known. And, the woo, the juxtaposition with the woo that I've always been in that space, but I didn't really fully show it. And that's what I said this year. I'm like, I'm not doing everything. All of the work that I'm doing is surrounding what we've been talking about. And if people want to do functional medicine, I'll be happy to address things with them, but that's not going to be like the main modality. And for a lot of the people I work with now, that's not even something we're doing. They don't want to do that. So it was really interesting just allowing myself, I should say, giving myself the space and allowing myself to be that person and not care about the judgment and not seek validation from any of those groups. It's really interesting because now I'll see some of those groups or those people online, and where I know when I'd scroll by, I would feel a little bit of like a resistance or an ick or something. I don't have that anymore, which it's so fascinating to experience this stuff in real time and watch yourself grow and be able to reflect back on that. So I want to be very honorable of your time, but any last little nuggets you would leave people with? Like you had mentioned earlier, some people are just curious and wanting to start on this journey. If somebody is in that curious space, what would you recommend their next step be?
Well, I think start following the breadcrumbs. That could mean books to read. It could mean following podcasts like this one, and just opening yourself to the notion that you may not know as much as you'd like to know or that you think you know, and that there's more beyond what we see that goes really deep. And if you allow yourself to think about spirituality and the way, the distance we can travel figuratively,
Yes.
metaphorically. And so follow the breadcrumbs, pick up a book, find something, find even, I use this term lightly, but find a guru that you sort of like the way they speak about certain things. Maybe they do a good job of tying in the science with the woo, the quantum kind of field and things of this nature. But whatever you're attracted to, just follow that. Like that's really the easiest way to go. I would never really spell out a recipe necessarily, but
Exactly.
your soul is guiding you anyways. And so where you feel more curious, just keep going in that direction and don't stop. Like that's part of it too, is that you can get interested in something and then put it down, and then you basically stall the progress. And so, make time for it. Make time for you. That's really what you're doing, is making time for you by exploring these subjects and learning more about your unique footprint in the world, the piece of the puzzle that you are.
Yeah,
Go deep.
that's
And you can
perfect.
find people to help you. Like there may be others that you can reach out to and say, whatever you said, it resonated with me. I don't know what I don't know, but I'd like to learn more. Where would you point me? And someone probably would be willing to help.
That's amazing. Yeah. And I like the fact that you pointed out, there's not one right way. You should follow what resonates with you and speaks to you, because that's where, the journey is going to take you, the most direct. And if anyone wants to find out more about what you offer and your work, where can they find you?
Great question. If you're a Facebook person, that's probably the best place to find me, Jonathan Carroll. And friend request me, just get in my orbit, my field. I love, making more friends and having people around that want to speak about these types of things. Yeah, I do have an Instagram handle, johnny.carroll, but I'm less active on there because a lot of my content is written. And so Facebook would be probably the best place. I'm recently back on LinkedIn too. That felt like a safe move. I was like, okay, I think I'm going to go back to LinkedIn, but obviously there's different content on those different platforms. But yeah, reach out. All the websites are kind of being rebuilt at the moment. And so there isn't a place that I would send anybody beyond just social media, but super happy to connect with anybody and everybody.
Yeah. And I will have his link in the show notes, so you'll have an easy way to access him there. And I just want to thank you so much for being on here, because like I said, I feel like you're in a different realm than so many people. And a lot of people aspire to be like that, but don't know how to get there. So you sharing your story and your experiences, I mean, that's just, it's a blessing on us all. So thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you so much for having me.
If you made it this far, I truly appreciate you. Remember, knowledge is just the beginning. Taking action is what truly sparks change. If you're overwhelmed and don't have enough energy to make it through the day, I invite you to book a free 20-minute coaching call with me. It's a no-obligation chat where we can discuss your health goals and how I might be able to help you achieve them. Visit the link in the episode description to book that call. Until next time, keep striving for wellness, and remember, you have the power to not just survive, but thrive in motherhood.